This video is brought to you by Avid Armor. Avid Armor makes high-quality vacuum sealers that are perfect for keeping your wild game meat fresher for longer. I use mine for wild mushrooms, fresh produce, and so much more. If you're interested in learning more, there's a link in the description box down below. Hello YouTube, welcome back to my channel. For those of you new here, my name is Allie and tonight I'm going to show you how to butcher the front shoulder of a deer. This bad boy is the front shoulder from a doe that I killed here in Pennsylvania with a muzzle loader. The front shoulder can be a difficult cut of meat to work with. It is not as sexy and exciting as the hindquarter is. If you're interested in learning how to butcher a hindquarter, I will have a link in the description box down below, or something will pop up. You can go check that out. But in the meantime, right now, we're breaking down a front shoulder. And boy, oh boy, this process is a process. There is a lot of really good information in this video about different ways that you can utilize this meat, a special little cut that may or may not be worth it to you. There's also a sneaky little gland in here that I teach you about as well. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Now I do have a handy second angle, so you guys will be able to see exactly what's going on. First thing I want to talk about is dry aging meat. So this meat has been dry aging for a couple of days now, and you'll notice that there is a very hard outer crust that has formed on the outside of the meat. There are a lot of benefits to dry aging. It's going to enhance the flavor of the meat and the tenderness of the meat. Those are like the two biggest reasons why you would want to dry age. It creates a really lovely flavor and it will tenderize some tougher cuts. And when it comes to venison, we're always trying to enhance the flavor. We're always trying to make it tender. So dry aging is a really great tactic to use, but I do not recommend it on the front shoulder. And it's kind of funny that I'm showing you a shoulder that has been dry aged. You will see firsthand why I don't recommend dry aging the front shoulder. And we'll dive into that once we start cutting. First thing you want to do when you remove the front shoulder from the body is cut away the gland. Right up here, right up here in the front, there is a pocket of fat that contains a nasty gland. I already cut this gland away, but you can still see the rest of the fat where the gland is normally located. So very first thing you want to do is cut away this fat pocket, because that gland can end up spreading some funky flavors through your meat if you end up accidentally cutting through it with your knife, or worse, if you forget to cut it off and it ends up in some of your grind meat or in a stew. Ooh, it is not going to make your meat taste good. So cut that fat away. The gland is within the fat. In most cases, you're probably already cutting it away without even knowing it, but it's important to know nonetheless. Before we cut any further, we need to think about how we want to eventually eat and enjoy this front shoulder. So there are a couple different ways you can do it. This portion up here contains the shoulder blade. The shoulder blade is a really big bone, and the meat that's connected to the shoulder blade is great for a roast. So one option that you have is to leave this shoulder blade portion bone in for roasts. You can put it in the crock pot, you can braise it. It is a wonderful way to enjoy this top portion of the shoulder blade. Another option is to leave the entire leg whole, and you can smoke the whole leg, you can roast the whole leg, and enjoy it like that. We've done that a number of times in the past when we've been like enjoying with family and friends. So that is another option. A third option would be to grind the entire thing. If you like to eat grind meat, grind the whole thing. No shame in that. Another option is to leave this shank portion bone in, which I really love to do with the shanks from the hindquarter. So you can also take the shanks from the fronts with the shanks from the backs, and then you've got 4 shanks that you can cook, which is fantastic. All of the connective tissue within the shanks really melts away when you cook it low, slow, and long like that. So that's another option. And the final option, which is what I'm going to be doing tonight, is removing a cut called the flat iron that is within the shoulder blade section of the front shoulder. And then I'll be grinding the rest. Now, the reason why I'm choosing to grind instead of like keeping the shanks for braising or doing a whole bone-in roast is because A, I really want to show you the flat iron, and B, because I dry aged this, I need to cut away a lot of this outer layer, and that is just going to decrease the amount of meat that I actually get off this front shoulder compared to if it was not dry aged. So because of that, it's just easiest to grind. So we're gonna start down here at the shank, and I'm gonna show you how you would pull this off, whether you wanna keep it for braising or whether you want to grind it. So first thing we're going to do is cut around the seams here where this knee joint, where this, elbow joint, is it an elbow or a knee? It's a knee, I think. We're gonna cut along these seams here where these lower muscles connect with the top muscles. So I'm gonna use my knife, draw a line, especially along where the white meets the pink. That's like a good way to think about it. So we'll cut through there, around the back, same thing on the opposite side. Cutting above this joint, and below, and all around. I'm wiggling this joint a lot because I'm trying to visualize where the joint comes together, and that's where I want to make my cuts. There it is. It is a pain to get through this one. Woo! If you wanted to keep it a bone-in shank, you would keep it exactly like this. I'm going to grind it. So I need to remove it from the bone. To do that, I'm going to cut the meat at the insertion points, the very edges of where it meets with the bone. Flip my knife, and I'm filleting the meat off the bone. So the bone is essentially my guide that I just cut down right there. And then you just continue that on all sides until it's all off the bone. Voila. Keep this bone for stock. The rest of this meat will get cleaned up for grind meat. To clean up the meat, I'll remove this hard outer crust that has been created from the dry age. And to do that, typically I'll cut it into slightly smaller sections just to make it a little more manageable. And then I will work my way around, filleting the crust off the meat. And it's definitely a bit of a pain to do, takes extra time, and I don't think the dry age is worth it in this process. If I did not dry age this meat, I would not have to spend the time cutting away this crust. And for meat that is going to be ground, I personally just don't see the benefit to it, basically. I do think it's important to add that I have heard of people keeping, I believe this is technically called the pellicle, this hard outer crust that forms from the dry age. I have heard of people using that in grind meat before. It's not something that I've ever done. I'm not completely convinced that it's a good idea. But if you've done it, let me know in the comments. So now I'll just cut it up into smaller sections. Do the best that you can to remove some of the harder tendons. So like here, I'll just go in and cut some of this tougher, thicker silver skin away, because even though we are grinding it, we really don't want that in our grind meat. Same thing down here. This is the big tendon that connects all of the meat to the bone. So I'll just take a little extra time to work that away or cut that away. You don't want that in your grind. But for a lot of this silver skin, I would not worry about it at all. You can leave the silver skin on and have it be part of your grind, and it won't affect the flavor too much. It's just the thick tendons and any thick pieces of fat that you really, really want to get rid of. Okay, and that is the shank. I highly recommend braising those, but we've got some beautiful grind meat set aside for that. Next thing we're gonna do is remove the blade from the rest of the lower portion of the leg. You need to locate the joint that connects the two, and there's not a whole lot to worry about here. Once you locate that joint, you can pretty much cut straight across, just like that. Cut where the white meets the red, and then work that joint off. You can see there's like the ball and where it sits in that joint. And now we're left with the blade portion, which again, this can be kept whole as a roast. I highly, highly recommend doing that. And then the rest of this meat can be ground. Because I'm grinding, I'm going to remove this meat from the bone. Nothing special about this, just run your knife blade against the bone and then go straight down using the bone as a guide. Until that bone is removed. Keep that for stock. Now this will receive the same treatment as the shank. I need to cut away this hard outer exterior, cut away some of these larger chunks of fat, and then we have more beautiful meat to grind. I'm gonna set that aside for now, and we are going to move on. The shoulder blade is really the star of this show because there is a tender cut of meat in here that you can keep and use as steaks. You can also use it for stir fries. You can use it in really any hot, fast cooking method to find it in this mess. First thing you want to do is locate the ridge on the shoulder blade, and you will be able to feel it with your fingers, the difference between the meat and the ridge line that runs on the shoulder blade. You're going to take your knife, and on one side of this ridge, you're going to draw a line using the ridge as your guide. Follow it all the way down. Both sides. Follow it all the way up, all the way down. Just like that. We just made a straight line. We're going to repeat the same thing on the opposite side. So take your knife, follow the ridge line all the way down, and then all the way back up. Now that we've made a cut on both sides, you'll notice one side is bigger than the other. We've got a big side and a little side. The flat iron is located on the larger side of the two. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this smaller side, and this meat is going to be used as grind as well. So to remove it, I'm just going to continue to follow the bone and fillet the meat off the bone. Because this meat is going to be ground, just like everything else that we've done so far, there's no wrong way to get it off the bone. You just need to cut until it comes off the bone, clean it up, and then it's ready to be ground. Woohoo! Now on to our flat iron. I'm gonna take my knife along that same ridge line that we just cut. I'm going to peel the meat back with my left hand, and then using my knife, I'm going to make cuts to get this meat off of the shoulder blade. I want this to all come off in one big chunk. So even up here at the top, you can draw a little line to help release that meat. And using your left hand, pull it back so you can kind of see what you're doing and just cut it off the bone. Using gravity here to let the meat fall away from the bone while I cut it off. There's some additional meat on the back of the shoulder blade that you can also cut off, trim, use for grind. The shoulder blade itself is another great bone for stock, so you'll want to save that too. Now we've got this big old hunk of meat, and if you flip it over, so you can tell that this was the outer side, because it's got that dry crust on it. On the underside, you'll notice there's one larger continuous piece of meat, and then there's some other stuff over here. This right here is the flat iron. So first thing I'm going to do is cut away this extra trim meat here, and I'm basically just following the natural seams that occur and cutting that meat away. Again, this will get cleaned up and go in the trim pile or grind pile, you know what I mean. Next thing, I'm gonna flip it back over. I wanna remove this outer crust. And as you peel it back, you'll see there's a very natural seam where it wants to come off itself. So I'm going to cut that away. Kind of using a fish fillet sort of method, where I have the hard outer crust in my left hand, my knife is underneath. I'm almost pulling this top layer back towards my knife and then just pushing my knife blade at an angle up, just slightly up, to remove the rest of that hard outer layer, like that. So you'll notice that I missed a little bit there and up here. Just want to continue cutting that away. And here I want to remove this silver skin. That's just a little extra meat that I didn't pull away from earlier. You could stop here in your processing, freeze it like this, and then finish processing it further right before you're ready to cook. But I'm going to show you what you need to do to finish processing this piece, just so you know what the end product looks like. There is a piece of silver skin that runs through these two pieces of meat. There's actually an upper portion of this flat iron and a bottom portion of this flat iron. And we want that out. If you would cook it just like this, it would create a really unpleasant eating experience to try and chew through that silver skin if you're trying to cook this as a steak. So down here at the bottom, you can see where this tendon kind of naturally occurs. And this is really hard to do, by the way. So I've got that tendon. I'm gonna first cut down until I hit it. And that really shows you the whole line where the silver skin is. So once I hit that silver skin, I'm gonna flip my knife almost horizontal almost parallel with the cutting board. Using my fingers, I'm gonna hold back that meat, the bottom meat, and then I'm gonna start to cut this top portion away. And I want the silver skin to stay on the bottom. And as I'm doing this, I'm trying to make really big cuts to cut all the way across to try and make this as even as possible. See, are we doing it? All right, we're doing good so far. Yep. Woo! There's steak number one. Wow. Thin as thin can be. I didn't do a perfect job, but you can tell that the silver skin stayed on this bottom piece. Now I'm gonna flip this over and literally repeat the same thing, but this time trying to leave the silver skin all on its own on the bottom. Woo! This is the silver skin that's left with just a little bit of meat on it. I did an okay job. Here's the other half of the steak. There is just a tiny bit of silver skin left on there. Just cut that away. So that right there is our flat iron steaks. Gorgeous, wonderful, very tender, is going to be delicious, is a pain to get, but if you're willing to do the extra work, they're there for you. So these I will save as steaks. The rest of this meat I will trim, put it in my grind pile. The bones can be saved for stock. And that is how you break down a front shoulder. There is a reason why there aren't many videos on this, and it's because most people just grind the whole thing. I do think it's definitely worth mentioning how good a bone-in shoulder blade roast can be. And if you harvest a large animal and you have the time and patience to cut these delicate cuts of meat out of the front shoulder, it's worth knowing. So I hope you learned something from this video nonetheless. It's also important to know where the gland is, even if you are grinding the whole shoulder. So that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions at all, any comments, leave them down below. And otherwise, I will see you in the next one.